Hello, my name is Sutton Dorsey, and I'm a 26-year-old freelance journalist. I live in San Francisco, California, a city where stunning hills descend from vibrant, well-lit streets to the glittering bay, often veiled by the morning fog. I grew up nearby in Palo Alto, a town where modern homes stand alongside multi-billion-dollar tech companies, and everyone seems caught in a relentless pursuit of some grand ambition. But the story I'm about to share isn't about those glamorous aspirations. It's about my family, a family that appeared flawless on the surface, yet concealed deep voids I only began to recognize as everything started to fall apart. I'm sitting here in my small San Francisco apartment, looking out at the city lights, which flicker like distant stars. It's late and sleep eludes me. My mind is consumed by fragments of a story I never imagined I'd have to tell. A tale of two fathers, two distinct worlds, and a truth buried for far too long. Tomorrow is the day before Father's Day, and I know that everything is about to change. My family isn't like the typical ones portrayed in movies or magazines. My father, Greg Dorsey, is a highly successful entrepreneur, the kind of man who seems to have stepped right out of the pages of Forbes. He's tall, with perfectly styled blonde hair, always impeccably dressed in expensive suits, and wearing a watch that gleams with gold. In Palo Alto, Greg Dorsey's name is synonymous with achievement. He owns a multi-million-dollar real estate company with an office in the heart of Silicon Valley, and people speak of him as an icon who rose from nothing. But I know that behind his confident smile and grand speeches lies a story he never tells. My father has always prided himself on being a self-made man, at wine-fueled parties or in newspaper interviews. He often cited my maternal grandfather, Preston Aldridge, as his inspiration and the cornerstone of his career. Preston is a larger-than-life figure, both literally and figuratively, standing. Nearly 2 meters tall, with a voice that booms like thunder, he built a fortune from his hotel business across California. My grandfather lives in a lavish mansion in Atherton, adorned with art and hosting extravagant parties you'd only see on the Instagram feeds of the elite. To my father, Preston embodies greatness, the man who guided him to success. But I've always sensed something was amiss with that narrative. My mother, Victoria, is Preston's only daughter. She's the epitome of beauty and poise, someone who has never had to lift a finger. I've never seen her cook a meal, clean a corner of the house, or even make her own coffee. Everything in our home was handled by a team of staff, from cleaning to caring for me when I was young. She lives in a world of silk dresses, afternoon teas with friends, and shopping trips on Rodeo Drive. I don't blame her. That's how she was raised. But sometimes I wonder if she ever feels a sense of emptiness in a life so cushioned by luxury. I grew up navigating two distinct worlds. On one side, there was the glamour of my parents, and on the other, the simplicity of my paternal grandfather, Howard Dorsey. Grandpa is a retired mechanical engineer who lives in a modest wooden house on the outskirts of Petaluma. His home is small but brimming with memories, black and white photos on the walls, a well-worn armchair he loves to sit in, and a small garden with apple trees he tends himself. Grandpa's a man of few words, but each one carries a profound weight, as if he's experienced enough highs and lows to understand that simple things truly matter. I also have an Uncle Philip, my father's younger brother. He lives in France, working in the fashion industry, and is married to a French woman named Claire. Uncle Philip is the only family member who regularly calls me, asking about my life and sharing stories about Paris's cobblestone streets and fragrant patisseries. He's the complete opposite of my father, gentle, humorous, and always knows how to make others feel heard. I've always wondered why the two brothers are so different, as if they were raised in entirely separate worlds. Tomorrow is Father's Day, and as always, my father is preparing for a grand party at our house. But this isn't a cozy family gathering with cookies and laughter. No, for my father, Father's Day is an opportunity to show off, to invite a crowd of relatives and his powerful friends, and to honor Preston, the man he always calls his second father. I'm accustomed to these parties, where people raise glasses, offer toasts, take photos for social media, and my father stands at the center delivering flowery speeches about my grandfather. But this year, something inside me is simmering, an unease I can't quite explain. I remember the rare times I've spent with Grandpa on occasions like this. He'd sit quietly in a corner, sipping a glass of water while everyone else laughed and chatted loudly. No one paid attention to him. No one offered him a glass of wine. My father, the son he raised, seemed to forget he was even there. I used to think it was just an oversight that my father was too busy with important guests. And now that I'm older, I'm starting to realize it wasn't an oversight. It was a choice. Yesterday, I called Grandpa to ask if he wanted me to pick him up for the party. His voice on the phone was as calm and gentle as ever. "Sutton, you don't need to do that. I'll manage," he said, and I could picture the sad smile on his face. I hung up, overcome with an indescribable sadness. I don't know why. Maybe because I've seen too many times how Grandpa sits quietly in the corner while Preston is celebrated like a king. Maybe because I've started to notice the cracks in the perfect story my father always tells. Or maybe simply, I can't bear to see Grandpa, the man who spent his life sacrificing, treated like a shadow. The Father's Day party is held at my parents' mansion in Palo Alto, a sprawling house with glass doors overlooking a sparkling pool. From early morning, the staff buzzes with preparations, from tables draped in white silk to trays of food arranged like works of art. My mother, in a dazzling emerald green dress, glides around, directing everything with the confidence of a queen. My father is busy checking the guest list, ensuring no important figure is missing. I stand in a corner of the room wearing a simple shirt, feeling out of place amidst this opulence. As the guests arrive, the atmosphere grows lively. My father's friends, business people, lawyers, and even a few local politicians stream in, exchanging handshakes and smiles. Preston arrives late as usual, for effect. He enters with a commanding presence, his perfectly tailored gray suit and confident smile drawing the crowd's attention like the sun pulling planets into orbit. I look around for Grandpa. He arrived early, sitting in a chair near the window, holding a glass of water. I approach, forcing a smile. "I'm glad you're here," I say, sitting beside him. He looks at me, his kind eyes tinged with an unspoken sadness. "Thank you, Sutton. I just want to see everyone happy," he says, his voice soft as a breeze. I want to say something to pull him out of that corner, to shout to the world that my grandfather deserves more recognition than anyone here, but I can't. I just sit there holding his hand, feeling the calluses on his palm marks of years of hard work that no one acknowledges. As the party begins, my father stands, raising a glass of red wine, his eyes gleaming. "Today is a special day," he begins, his voice echoing through the room. "A day to honor the fathers who have guided us, inspired us, and I want to take this moment to thank someone extraordinary, Preston Aldridge, the man who made me who I am today." The room erupts in applause. Preston stands, flashing a triumphant smile, and begins his speech. I glance at Grandpa. He's still there, gazing out the window, as if he doesn't belong in this place. The glass of water in his hand remains untouched. No one has offered him wine. No one has invited him to say a word. A wave of anger surges within me, burning in my chest. I want to stand up to shout that they're honoring the wrong man. But I just sit there, clenching my fist, telling myself I'll do something. Not today, but soon. This story can't end like this. 30 minutes pass, and the room is still filled with laughter and the clinking of wine glasses. The light from the crystal chandeliers cascades down, making everything sparkle like a scene from a Hollywood movie. I sit next to Grandpa, trying to suppress the growing sense of helplessness swelling inside me. He remains quiet, his thin hands resting on his lap, his eyes fixed on the glass of water in front of him. I want to pull him out of this dim corner, to take him somewhere he's appreciated. But I know in this moment that's impossible. It's not in my father's world, where everything is measured by wealth and status. My father still stands at the center of the room, his eyes gleaming like a showman at the peak of his performance. He's just finished his speech praising Grandpa Preston, and the crowd is still clapping, their laughter and compliments echoing endlessly. I glance at Preston, standing beside my father, his elegant gray suit hugging his frame, a smug smile playing on his lips. My maternal grandfather is the kind of man you'd think was born to be celebrated, and my father, it seems, has spent his entire life ensuring that Preston's spotlight never dims. I turn to Grandpa, intending to say something to break the stifling atmosphere, but a soft tap on a wine glass silences the room. My father raises his hand, signaling for everyone's attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," he begins, his voice dripping, with theatrical flair, as if he's about to announce a $1 million deal. "Today, on Father's Day, I want to present a special gift to honor the man who made me who I am today." The room's eyes are fixed on him, curious. My heart beats faster. Not from excitement, but from a sinking premonition. A server steps forward, carrying an intricately carved wooden box, polished to a glossy shine. The crowd murmurs, a few people standing to get a better view. My father opens the box, and the chandelier's light reveals a sparkling bottle of whiskey. Inside, "This," my father says, his voice brimming with pride, "is a bottle of Macallan 1926. A masterpiece worth $120,000, a fitting gift to honor Preston Aldridge, the man who inspired me, who gave me the wings to soar in the world of business." The room erupts. Applause, whistles, and gasps of admiration fill the air. Someone shouts, "Greg, you really know how to go big." A few people raise their phones, recording the moment, no doubt to post on social media with excited captions. Preston steps forward, accepting the whiskey from my father's hands, his smile wider than ever. He holds the bottle aloft, the light refracting through the glass, creating shimmering beams. "Thank you, Greg," he says, his voice booming. "This is not just a bottle of whiskey. It's a symbol of success, of the dreams we've built together." My throat tightens. I look at Grandpa, hoping for some reaction, even just a furrowed brow or a shake of his head, but he just sits there, hands clasped tightly, eyes fixed on his glass of water, as if it's the only thing that matters in this room. No one notices him. No one invites him to stand and speak. My paternal grandfather, Howard Dorsey, the man who spent his life raising my father, who sacrificed everything for him to have this day, is now just a shadow in his own family. I can't take it anymore. I stand, intending to step outside for some air, but my mother, radiant in her emerald green dress, stops me. "Sutton, where are you going?" she asks, her voice gentle but pointed. "The party's only just begun." "I need some air," I reply, trying to keep my voice steady. She looks at me, a flicker of suspicion in her eyes, but then she nods and turns back to the crowd. I step out to the backyard, where the pool glimmers under the moonlight. I stand there, taking deep breaths, trying to quell the burning anger in my chest. $120,000 for a bottle of whiskey? $120,000 to honor a man I know for certain didn't raise my father? Meanwhile, my grandfather, the one who truly deserves it, is pushed to the sidelines like an uninvited guest. I pull out my phone, scrolling through social media. It's expected. The moment my father presented the whiskey is already going viral. People are commenting, praising his generosity, calling him the ideal son and a symbol of gratitude. I grip my phone tightly, feeling the urge to hurl it into the pool. Gratitude? That's gratitude. Then why is my grandfather sitting alone in a corner without a single mention? I head back inside, determined not to let my emotions take over. I return to Grandpa's side and sit down. "Would you like something to eat?" I ask, trying to keep my voice light. He looks at me, offering a sad smile. "I'm not hungry, Sutton. But thank you." I hold his hand, feeling the calluses on his palm, marks of years of hard work that no one in this room acknowledges. The party continues, but I no longer have the heart to participate. I sit with Grandpa, the two of us, watching. Everything like outcasts. As the party nears its end and guests begin to leave, I stand, helping Grandpa put on his coat. "I'll drive you home, okay?" I say, trying to keep my voice from trembling. He nods, but before we leave, he turns to look at the room one last time. I'm not sure what he's searching for. A glance from my father, a farewell from my mother, or just a shred of recognition, but there's nothing. On the drive to Grandpa's house in Petaluma, I steer in silence. His home lies on the outskirts, far from the clamor of Palo Alto. The road winds through fields and rows of apple trees, the moonlight casting ethereal shadows. The night breeze flows through the car window, carrying the scent of dry grass and earth, as if trying to soothe the anger still smoldering in my chest. Grandpa sits beside me, holding the box of pastries I took from the party, his gaze fixed out the window. I don't know what he's thinking, but his silence feels heavy, like an untold story. I glance at him, wanting to say something to break this atmosphere, but every time I open my mouth, the words slip away. How can I tell him how furious I am at seeing him sidelined? How can I describe the helplessness of watching my father honor Preston with a $120,000 bottle of whiskey while he, the true father, doesn't even get offered a glass of wine?
Ow.
I grip the steering wheel tightly, trying to focus on the road, but my mind keeps drifting to the image of Grandpa sitting quietly in the corner, his untouched glass of water. When we reach his familiar wooden house in Petaluma, the moonlight illuminates the small porch, highlighting the worn armchair he often sits in. I turn off the engine and step out to open his door. "Let me help you," I say, offering my hand. Grandpa waves me off, a faint smile on his face. "I can still walk, Sutton. Don't worry." But I do worry, not just because he's getting older, but because I see the deep sadness in his eyes. I carry the pastry box and follow him inside. The house feels as I remember it, the smell of old wood, a hint of apple from the backyard garden, and a nearly sacred stillness. Black and white photos on the walls tell the story of a bygone era. Grandpa as a young engineer, Grandma beside him with a radiant smile, and their two boys, my father and Uncle Philip. Tiny and holding hands in the garden, I set the pastry box on the kitchen table and sit beside him. After a moment of silence, Grandpa speaks unexpectedly. "Sutton, don't be angry at your father, Greg. He has pressures you don't see. I don't need anyone's praise. I just want to see my son happy." His words cut through my heart like a knife. I want to tell him that my father doesn't deserve his forgiveness, that he deserves so much more recognition. But I don't. I know those words would only hurt him more. We sit in the small kitchen, sipping hot tea, Grandpa brewed and nibbling on the pastries. I try to lighten the mood, telling him about my work in San Francisco, the articles I'm writing, and the colorful streets I wander. He listens, nodding occasionally, his eyes lighting up when I mention small things. Like the time I got lost in the Mission District and stumbled upon the best taco shop of my life. Then, as if the moonlight outside unlocked a door to his memories, Grandpa begins to speak. Voice is low and slow, like he's turning the pages of an old book. "Back when your father and Philip were young, I worked all day at the machine shop, then took night shifts at an auto repair garage. Some days I only slept 3 hours, but I still got up early to take them to school." I listen, my heart pounding. I knew Grandpa had worked hard, but this is the first time he shared such details. "You never told me this," I say, my voice softening. He smiles, a bittersweet edge too. What's there to tell, Sutton? That's what a father does. I worked so Greg and Philip could have a better future. I didn't want them growing up poor like I did." My throat tightens. "But Dad, he never mentions those things. He only talks about Preston, how he helped him start his business." Grandpa falls silent for a moment, his gaze dropping to his tea. "Greg, he wants to forget the past. He wants to be part of the glamorous world Preston represents. I don't blame him, but sometimes I wish he'd remember the days before Preston." His words make me want to cry. I think of my father standing in the spotlight, proudly speaking of Preston as if he's the only one who mattered in his journey. I think of the $120,000 whiskey bottle, the applause, the social media posts. And I think of Grandpa, who worked himself to exhaustion to put my father through school, never once acknowledged. As we talk, Grandpa's phone rings. He glances at the screen, a rare smile spreading across his face. "It's Philip," he says, then answers. I hear Uncle Philip's warm, lively voice from the other end. "Happy Father's Day, Dad. I'm in Paris, but I wish I were there with you. How are you?" I watch Grandpa sit up straighter, his eyes sparkling. Like a child's. "I'm fine, Philip. Thanks for calling." "How are Claire and the kids?" He chats with Philip for a while, his voice softer, as if the call has warmed his heart. I sit there listening, feeling both joy and sorrow. Joy because Philip still remembers Grandpa, sorrow because my father, his eldest son, doesn't. He hangs up. I can't hold back. "I'm glad Philip called," I say. "But I don't understand, Dad. How can he be so indifferent? You did everything for him, and yet he honors Preston as if you don't exist. Grandpa places a hand on my shoulder, his voice low but firm. Don't be angry at your father. Anger will only hurt you. If you want to do something, tell your own story. That's the power of a journalist. His words are like a beam of light piercing the darkness. I look at him, a new resolve igniting within me. He's right, I'm a journalist. I can tell his story. The story of a quiet father, of sacrifices no one mentions. I may not be able to change my father, but I can make the world know the truth. The next morning, I return to San Francisco with a clear purpose. I open my laptop and create a new folder titled Howard Dorsey, the Forgotten Father. I know I need evidence, pieces of the past, to paint a complete picture of my grandfather. All I have now are his scattered stories, an old handwritten letter I found in my parents' house, and an unshakable sense of indignation. As a journalist, I've learned to dig deep and seek the truth. This time I'm doing it not just for work, but for family. I start by calling people who might know about Grandpa's past. My contact list isn't long, but I remember having the number of one of Grandpa's close colleagues, Frank. I find his number in my phone. Frank is the coworker Grandpa often described as his best friend, the only one at the factory who wielded a wrench better than he did. I call Frank, and after a few rings, a warm, gravelly voice answers. Sutton, my goodness, it's been a while. Frank laughs heartily over the phone. How are you? How's Howard doing? I take a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. I'm good, Frank. Grandpa's. He's okay, but I wanted to talk to you about him. I'm trying to learn more about the old days, about what he did for our family. Frank pauses as if sifting through memories. Howard's a special man, he says, his voice softening. What do you want to know? He was the best guy I ever worked with. I tell Frank about the Father's Day party, the expensive whiskey, and how my father honored Preston without once mentioning Grandpa. I can't hide the frustration in my voice. I want the truth, I say. What did Grandpa do for my dad? Why does my dad never talk about him? Frank sighs. Sutton, your grandfather was an extraordinary man. Back when we worked at the machine shop, he was the best engineer, not just because of his skills, but because he always thought of others. Once, a coworker had an accident and lost his job, and Howard secretly gave him part of his own paycheck to help his family. He never bragged, never wanted anyone to know. I jot down every word, my heart beating faster. What about our family? Do you know anything about what Grandpa did for my dad and Uncle Philip? Oh, Sutton, Frank says, his voice thick with emotion. Howard gave everything for those two boys. When your grandmother was seriously ill, he worked at the shop all day, then ran around looking for doctors and buying medicine. Then he'd rush home in the morning to make breakfast for your dad and Philip. But I never heard him complain. When Evelyn passed away, he was only 36, raising Greg and Philip. On his own, my throat tightens. I knew Grandma died young, but I'd never heard the details like this. What did Grandpa do to raise them? I ask, my voice trembling. He worked like a machine, Frank replies. Days at the shop, nights at an auto repair garage. Once, he mortgaged the house in Petaluma to pay for Greg's college tuition. He wanted Greg to get into a good university, to have opportunities he never had. But you know, Howard rarely told anyone about this. To him, it was just a father's duty. I stop writing, setting my pen down. The image of Grandpa fills my mind. A lean man with calloused hands, working tirelessly so his sons could have a better future. Meanwhile, my father, who benefited from those sacrifices, stood before a crowd, praising Preston as if he were the only one who mattered in his life. Frank also tells me that Grandpa once turned down a promotion at the machine shop because he needed to stay home to care for his wife and sons. My heart aches. Turned down a promotion? He never told me that, Frank replies slowly. He wouldn't. Howard's not the type to boast, but I remember when Evelyn passed, he nearly broke down. Yet he kept going, working, raising Greg and Philip. Some days, he'd eat just bread to save money for their school books. But you know, he always smiled. Always, even though I knew how much pain he was hiding. Sit there listening, a wave of emotion surging within me. I think of my father, how he's crafted an image of himself as a self-made man, how he only ever mentions Preston in his success stories. Meanwhile, Grandpa, who gave up everything to raise him, has been erased from that narrative. I start writing, not just as a journalist, but as a granddaughter seeking justice for her grandfather. I write about the days he worked at the machine shop, the nights he sat by Grandma's bedside, the house he mortgaged so my father could attend college. I write about his smile, how he hid his pain so his sons wouldn't worry. I write about the Father's Day party, the $120,000 whiskey bottle, and how Grandpa was sidelined in his own family. My San Francisco apartment is bathed in the pale blue glow of my laptop screen. It's 3 o'clock in the morning, but I can't stop. My fingers dance across the keyboard, each word like a brushstroke, sweeping away the dust covering Grandpa's story. Not just writing to tell the truth, I'm writing to bring him back into the light, to ensure he's no longer an invisible shadow in this family. Every sentence, every line, is a promise I made to him that night in Petaluma. I won't let you be forgotten. I titled the piece, The Man Who Never Bragged. It's not just Grandpa's story. It's a declaration for the silent heroes, the fathers and mothers who sacrificed their lives without needing a thank you. As the sun rises through my window, I finish the article and publish it on Substack at noon, accompanied by an old photo of Grandpa, him standing in his Petaluma garden, a gentle smile on his face, holding a freshly picked apple. Within hours, the post starts to spread. My Substack followers, mostly friends and colleagues, begin sharing it. A few leave comments expressing empathy. This story made me think of my dad, one writes. He sacrificed so much, and I've never thanked him. Another shares. I cried reading about your grandfather. Thank you for telling this story. I sit at my laptop reading each comment, my heart aching and warming at the same time. I didn't expect the piece to resonate with so many people. That night, my phone rings. It's Dad. I stare at his name on the screen, my heart pounding. I knew. My post would reach him eventually, and I'm ready to face him. Answer, and his voice comes through, cold and sharp. Sutton, what are you doing? What the hell were you thinking? You're slandering me to glorify some washed-up old man? I gripped the phone tightly, forcing my voice to stay calm. You're calling Grandpa a washed-up old man? Do you even know what he did for you? He mortgaged his house, worked himself to exhaustion, gave up every opportunity so you could go to college. You spent $120,000 on a bottle of whiskey to honor Preston, a man who didn't raise you. Meanwhile, Grandpa, who gave everything, doesn't even get a glance from you. There's a pause, but I hear his heavy breathing through the phone. Sutton, he says, his voice lower but still firm. Don't need anyone dragging up that impoverished past? I've worked my whole life to escape it. You wouldn't understand. No, you're the one who doesn't understand, I retort, my voice trembling with anger. You think success is expensive whiskey and lavish parties? You think Preston made you who? You're wrong. Grandpa made you, and you've erased him from your life like he doesn't exist. He doesn't respond immediately. I hear him sigh. Then he says, colder than ever. You'll regret this article, Sutton. You're tearing this family apart. Then he hangs up. Sit there, phone still in hand, feeling like my heart is being squeezed. Tearing the family apart? No, I'm not destroying anything. I'm just seeking justice for Grandpa, for the man who gave his life without a single thank you. But I also know this confrontation is only the beginning. My father won't easily accept the truth, and I'll have to face more storms ahead. The next morning, my article is spread even further. It's appearing on forums and discussion groups. Some readers start sharing their own stories about forgotten fathers and mothers who weren't glamorous or wealthy. One writes, thank you, Sutton, Dorsey, for reminding me that the quiet ones are the real heroes. Another shares, I called my dad after reading this, and for the first time, I said, thank you. I read these words, my eyes stinging with tears. I call Grandpa, wanting to tell him everything. Sutton, he says, his voice warm but slightly shaky. You didn't need to do all this for me. I just want you to be happy. But I want the world to know about you, I reply. I want them to know how amazing you are. He chuckles softly over the phone. Thank you, Sutton. But be careful. Don't let anger cost you your family. His words make me pause and reflect. I know he's worried for me. I'm worried that this article will drive a permanent wedge between me and my father, but I can't stop now. Not when Grandpa's story is reaching thousands. Not when the truth about him is finally being seen. Everything seemed to be on track until one morning. 3 days after my article was published, I received a call from Frank. His voice was urgent, trembling over the phone. Sutton, where are you, Howard? He had a heart attack. He's at Santa Rosa Memorial Hospital. My heart stopped. What happened? I asked, my hand shaking so badly I nearly dropped the phone. We were talking, Frank said, his voice breaking, about the old days, the machine shop. Then he suddenly clutched his chest and collapsed. Come quickly, Sutton. I didn't think. I grabbed my car keys, rushed out, and didn't even lock the apartment. Driving to Petaluma faster than usual, my mind swirled with the worst images. Grandpa, with his gentle smile and calloused hands, couldn't leave me. Not now, when I hadn't done enough to ensure he was recognized. The road wound through fields and apple orchards, the morning sun shining down. But all I could see was Grandpa. Collapsing in his familiar wooden house, Santa Rosa Memorial Hospital came into view, surrounded by towering oak trees. I ran into the emergency room and found Frank in the hallway, his face etched with worry. Sutton, he called, stepping forward to hug me. He's in critical care. The doctors say it was a stroke, but they're doing everything they can. I gripped Frank's hand, my legs weak. He'll be okay, right? I asked, my voice trembling. Looked at me, his eyes sad but trying to reassure. Howard's a strong man. He's been through a lot. We have to believe he'll pull through. I nodded, but a storm of emotions raged inside me. I couldn't lose Grandpa, not now, not when I'd just begun telling his story. Sitting in the hospital hallway, I pulled out my phone, my hands shaking as I found Uncle Philip's number. It was late in France, but I couldn't wait. When he answered, his voice groggy, I stammered, Uncle Philip, Grandpa had a stroke. He's at Santa Rosa Memorial. Can you come? Sutton. Stay calm, he said instantly. Alert. I'll book a flight right away. I'll be there as soon as I can. Stay with him, okay? I nodded and hung up. Next, I called Dad. The phone rang a few times before he answered. Sutton, what is it? His voice was cold, as if I were interrupting. Grandpa had a stroke, I said, trying to stay calm. He's in the hospital. Can you come? There was a pause. I heard murmurs in the background, probably a meeting. Sutton, I'm in New York for an important meeting. I can't leave. Is he stable? I gripped the phone, anger flaring. He's in the ER, Dad. You can't skip one meeting to be with him. Don't talk to me like that, he snapped, his voice icy. I'll come as soon as I can. Keep me updated. Hung up, I sat there, phone in hand, feeling like I'd been slapped. My father, who spent $120,000 on a bottle of whiskey to honor Preston, couldn't leave a meeting for the father lying in critical care. I wanted to scream, to call back and force him to face the truth, but I couldn't. Not now, when Grandpa needed me most. After an hour, the doctor emerged, his face grave. Howard had a severe brain hemorrhage, he said, his voice low. The bleeding caused significant brain swelling. We've intubated him and are keeping him in the ICU, but he's in a deep coma. The prognosis is very poor. He may not survive the next few days. The family should prepare. His words hit me like a punch to the chest. I staggered, gripping the wall for support. A deep coma, I repeated, my voice shaking. He won't wake up. The doctor looked at me, his eyes compassionate but honest. We're doing everything we can, but with a hemorrhage and swelling this severe, the chances are slim. He could pass at any moment. I recommend the family stay with him in the coming days. I nodded, my mind blank. Frank put a hand on my shoulder, his voice choked. Sutton, we have to be strong. Howard would want that. I entered the ICU where Grandpa lay motionless on the bed, a breathing tube in his mouth, the steady beep of machines. Like a mournful song, his face was pale, his eyes closed, no trace of the gentle smile I knew. I took his hand, but he didn't respond. The calluses on his palm felt cold, as if life was slipping away, "Grandpa," I whispered, tears streaming down. "I'm here. Won't let you go alone." For the next few days, I barely left the hospital. I sat by his bedside, holding his hand, whispering stories about his Petaluma apple orchard, my article, and the people who cried reading his story. I hoped even faintly that he could hear me, that he knew I was there. But he remained still, only the rhythmic sound of the ventilator breaking the silence. Uncle Philip arrived on the third day after. A long flight from Paris? He hugged me tightly the moment he stepped into the hospital, his eyes red. "Thank you for being here with him," he said. "I'm sorry I couldn't come sooner." "I'm glad you're here," I replied, feeling a small comfort. He brought Sophie, his young daughter, who drew a scribbled picture of Grandpa in his apple orchard. I placed it by his bed, hoping that somewhere in his coma he could feel our love. But Dad still didn't show. I called a few more times, only getting short texts. "I'm trying to arrange things. Keep me posted." Each message cut deeper. I didn't want to believe he could be so indifferent, but his absence said it all. One night, sitting by Grandpa's bed, the ventilator's steady hum filling the air, I opened my laptop and began writing my final piece. My grandfather, the father my father forgot. I didn't write with the anger of my previous article, but with a deep sorrow mixed with love for Grandpa. I wrote about the moment he collapsed, how Frank called for help, and the days he lay motionless in the ICU. I wrote about Uncle Philip, who flew from France to be by his side, and about my father, who chose a New York meeting over the father fighting to live. Today my grandfather lies in the hospital in a deep coma, his heart still beating but his life slipping away, I wrote. I'm writing this not to accuse, but to remind myself and all of us that silent fathers like my grandfather deserve to be cherished while they're still here. I posted the article on Substack at midnight with a photo of Grandpa in his hospital bed, surrounded by tubes and wires. The post spread faster than I expected. By morning, hundreds of comments poured in, from strangers sharing their stories too. Grandpa's old friends sending prayers. A few major publications reached out wanting interviews. But I didn't care about the attention. I just wanted Grandpa to know, even in his coma, that he wasn't invisible, that his story had touched thousands of hearts. Philip and I took turns sitting by Grandpa, holding his hand, telling him about the comments and the people who cried reading his story. Sophie sat nearby, softly singing a French lullaby, as if hoping her voice could pull him back. But he remained. Still, the ventilators hum a reminder that he was still alive. On the 5th day, I got a text from Dad. "Sutton, I'm on my way. Don't let him go before I get there." I read it, feeling a flicker of hope mixed with anger. He was finally coming. But would it be in time? Dad walked into the hospital room that evening, his shirt wrinkled, lacking his usual polish. He stood by Grandpa's bed, his eyes full of regret. He placed an old bottle of whiskey on the table, the one he and Grandpa had once shared years ago. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice trembling, though Grandpa couldn't hear. "I'm sorry I didn't see." I stood there silently, witnessing the moment, my heart breaking. It was the first time I'd seen Dad cry, but it came too late. Grandpa couldn't wait to see those tears, couldn't pat his shoulder as he used to when Dad was young. Dad sat silently, clutching Grandpa's hand, still as a stone. I didn't know what he was thinking. Pain, regret, guilt, or just work. I didn't know, and I didn't want to ask. Just a few hours later, Grandpa took his final breath. I couldn't stop thinking that he'd held on all these days, fighting just to see Dad one last time. When Dad stood by his bed, perhaps Grandpa was at peace with nothing left to hold him here. Heartbreakingly, even in his final moments, the one thing he longed for was to be seen. To hear his son's voice, the son, who in his entire life never once acknowledged his silent sacrifices. The monitor displayed a flat, merciless line, accompanied by a long, cold beep. Grandpa passed away peacefully in the arms of me, Philip, and Dad. He left quietly as he had lived, without fanfare, without demands, but leaving a void nothing could fill. I sat by his bed, holding his hand one last time, promising that his story would live on. Grandpa's funeral was held 3 days later at a small church in Petaluma, where he used to attend every Sunday. That day my father with all his extravagance and desire to make amends, turned the funeral into an unforgettable event. He hired a top-tier event planning company from San Francisco, transforming the church into a splendid space adorned with hundreds of white lily Grandpa's favorite flower. A choir was brought in, singing the hymns he used to hum in his apple orchard. Large photos of Grandpa lined the entrance, from his youthful days in an engineer's uniform to moments with Grandma, his radiant smile beaming. I stood in a corner of the church, watching the stream of people who came to pay their respects. Grandpa's old friends, colleagues from the machine shop, and even strangers who had read my Substack article. They hugged me, offered condolences, and shared how Grandpa had touched their lives. Frank Miller, his eyes red, recounted how Grandpa once helped pay hospital bills for his son. Martha, an old neighbor, whispered that Grandpa secretly planted an apple tree in her yard so her young daughter could have fruit to eat. These stories filled me with pride and pain. Grandpa had lived a meaningful life, but why did it take his passing for people to notice? My father stood at the center, greeting guests with a solemn expression. He wore a perfectly tailored black suit, but his usual confidence was gone. He shook hands, thanking people for coming, but his eyes were distant, as if searching for something he'd lost long ago. When the service began, he stepped up to the podium, holding the microphone, his hands trembling. My father, Howard Dorsey, he began, his voice low and halting, was a man. He never bragged, never demanded anything, did everything for me, and my brother Philip. But I didn't see it. He paused, taking a deep breath, and I saw tears roll down his cheeks. I spent my life chasing glamour, trying to prove I was worthy. But standing here today, I realized the most precious thing I ever had was my father. The church fell silent. My heart tightened. This was the first time I'd heard Dad publicly acknowledge Grandpa, admitting the sacrifices he'd deliberately ignored. But those words, though sincere, came too late. Grandpa wasn't here to hear them. I looked at Uncle Philip, who was wiping tears, holding Sophie tightly. My mother, in an elegant black dress, sat in the front row, her eyes downcast, silent. The service ended with a short video. Dad had commissioned images of Grandpa from his youth to his final years, narrated by a professional voiceover praising his life. I knew Dad had spent a fortune on this funeral, from the flowers to the music to the video. But seeing all that extravagance, I felt no comfort. I saw a man trying to atone for years of neglecting his father by throwing a lavish ceremony that Grandpa, the man who cherished simplicity, would likely never have wanted. After the funeral, we took Grandpa's ashes to his Petaluma apple orchard, where they were scattered per his wishes. I stood among the trees he'd tended, feeling the cool breeze as if he were still here, smiling at me. Philip stood beside me, holding Sophie's hand, whispering he'd love this place. Dad stood a few steps away, silent, his eyes fixed on the swaying branches. I didn't know what he was thinking, but for the first time, he looked small, no longer the powerful man of lavish parties. In the days following the funeral, Dad changed, grew quiet, withdrawn, often sitting alone in his study, staring at the old whiskey bottle he'd placed by Grandpa's hospital bed. Mom grew worried. Your father's not okay, she told me one evening, her voice uneasy. He's not eating, not sleeping, just sitting there like he's punishing himself. Visited Dad and found him in the dark, the old whiskey bottle on the table. Before him, Dad, I called softly. Are you okay? He looked at me, his eyes empty. Sutton, I was wrong, he said, his voice. Let my father go without a single thank you. I chose meaningless things, Moni's status over him. I don't know how to fix it. I sat beside him, feeling a mix of compassion and anger. You can't fix the past, I said. But you can live differently for Grandpa. He wouldn't want you to torment yourself like this. But Dad didn't listen. He spiraled into a psychological crisis. Neglecting work, canceling meetings, and spending hours poring over old letters from Grandpa that I'd found. Mom, despite her usual polished demeanor, began to panic. Sutton, we have to do something, she said. Your father's destroying himself. Mom and I took Dad to a therapist in San Francisco, a specialist in grief and regret. In the first sessions, Dad barely spoke, sitting with a distant gaze as if reliving the moments he'd missed with Grandpa. The therapist, a middle-aged woman, with a gentle voice, urged him to confront his guilt. "Greg," she said, "regret is normal, but you can't let it define the rest of your life. Your father loved you, and he'd want you to live well." I joined a few sessions, not just to support Dad, but to understand myself. I was still angry with him, but I also saw he was suffering in his own way. In one session, he took my hand, his voice trembling. "Sutton, I'm sorry for letting you down. I failed as a son and as a father." His words brought me to tears. I didn't know if I could forgive him immediately, but I knew he was trying. I hugged him, feeling for the first time in years a real connection, not through lavish parties or big deals, but through the shared pain and loss we both carried. In the weeks that followed, Dad began to recover slowly. He returned to work, but stopped throwing extravagant parties or buying expensive whiskey. Instead, he spent time in Petaluma, tending Grandpa's apple orchard as if to keep him alive in his memory. Mom, though still poised, began speaking more about Grandpa, sharing memories she'd heard from Dad. I continued writing on Substack, but no longer about injustice or regret. Instead, I wrote about Grandpa's lessons, sacrifice, and the importance of cherishing loved ones while they're here. My final article about Grandpa continued to be shared, touching the hearts of strangers. But now it wasn't just his story. It was the story of a family trying to heal the wounds of the past. A year has passed since Grandpa's death, but every time I close my eyes, I still see him standing in his Petaluma apple orchard, holding a red apple, his gentle smile lighting up his face. Time hasn't erased the pain, but it's taught me how to live with it. My San Francisco apartment remains the same, with the city lights twinkling outside the window. But I'm no longer the Sutton from a year ago, full of anger and determined to seek justice for Grandpa. I carry a fragile piece built from the lessons he left behind. Father's Day is approaching this year, and for the first time in many years, I don't feel the familiar tension or heavy sadness. Instead, there's a glimmer of hope. Our family, though still scarred, has begun to heal. Dad no longer throws lavish parties to honor Preston. He spends more time in Petaluma, sometimes staying at Grandpa's old house for weeks, calling me too. "Come taste the ripe apples." Uncle Philip and his family remain in France, but we stay in touch regularly, and every call includes a fond, wistful mention of Grandpa. I decided this Father's Day would be different. No more expensive whiskey bottles or grandiose speeches. I wanted to hold a small gathering at Grandpa's wooden house in Petaluma to honor him, to share his stories, and to let our family feel his presence even in his absence. I called Dad to propose hosting Father's Day in Petaluma. At first, he was silent, and I feared he'd refuse, reverting to his glamorous world with some excuse. But then he said, his voice low and sincere, "All right, Sutton, that's a good idea. I'll be there." Mom, though initially hesitant, agreed too. "I'll help you prepare," she said, and I heard a warmth in her voice, rare in recent years. Uncle Philip, unable to fly from France, sent a short video of him and Sophie standing in a Paris garden, sharing memories of Grandpa. "He'd be so happy to see us gathered for him," Philip said, his eyes glistening. On Father's Day, I drove to Petaluma early, bringing a box of cookies from Grandpa's favorite bakery and a few old photos I'd found in his house. The wooden house was unchanged. The small porch, the worn armchair, the apple orchard brimming with memories. I stood in the garden, breathing in the scent of dry grass and earth, feeling as if Grandpa were still here, smiling at me. My parents arrived at noon. Dad wore a simple shirt, no longer the polished figure of old. He stepped inside, looking around, his gaze lingering on the photos on the wall, Grandpa and Grandma, him and Philip as kids. Mom, in a simpler dress than usual, placed a bouquet of white lilies on the kitchen table. "I never realized how much my father-in-law loved this garden," she said softly. "He must have been so happy here." We prepared a simple dinner together. No private chefs or elaborate dishes like past parties. I made Grandpa's favorite mashed potatoes. Mom warmed up an apple pie she'd brought, and Dad carefully opened a bottle of red wine, not an expensive one, but the kind Grandpa used to drink at family dinners. We sat around the old wooden table where Grandpa once told stories and laughed with me and Philip. The evening began with Philip's video. Dumb. On the laptop screen, he and Sophie stood in a Paris garden, a gentle breeze rustling the trees. Hello. Everyone, Philip said, his voice warm. It's Father's Day, and though I can't be there, I want us to remember Grandpa. He loved his apple orchard, family evenings, and all of us, even when we didn't always see it. Sophie held up a scribbled drawing of Grandpa among apple trees. I made this for Grandpa, she said, and I saw Dad's eyes well up. After the video, Dad stood, holding his wine glass. Sutton, Victoria, and Philip and Sophie, he began, his voice trembling. Today I want to say something I didn't get to say to my father. I'm sorry for not cherishing him while he was here. Your grandfather did everything for me, mortgaged his house, worked himself to exhaustion, taught me how to be a man. But I was too busy chasing meaningless things, and I let him go without a thank you. He paused, wiping tears. Today, I want to promise to my Father in heaven, to all of you, that I'll live differently. I'll keep this garden, his memories, and try to be a better father like he was. I looked at Dad, feeling an indescribable emotion. For the first time, he was sincere, no longer hiding behind suits or grandiose speeches. Mom took his hand, her eyes softer than usual. Greg, she said, he'd be so proud of you. He began sharing memories of Grandpa. I talked about the nights he taught me to stargaze from the porch, how he laughed when I spilled apple juice on my shirt. Mom shared how, during a visit to Petaluma, Grandpa secretly gave her a fresh apple, saying it was sweeter than any Palo Alto dessert. Dad recounted his childhood when Grandpa took him and Philip fishing despite being exhausted from night shifts. He always smiled, Dad said, his voice breaking. No matter how tired, he never let us see it. As dinner ended, I stepped onto the porch, gazing at the apple orchard under the moonlight. The night breeze carried the scent of earth and grass, as if Grandpa were still here, quietly watching. I thought about my journey, from the anger after that Father's Day party, to the Substack articles, to the final days by Grandpa's hospital bed. I thought about Dad, how he'd changed however late in our family learning to heal. Grandpa once told me, if you want to do something, tell your own story, and I did. I told his story not just for justice, but to remind myself and others that the quiet ones like Grandpa are the true heroes. My Substack posts are still shared, still inspiring. Now they're not just about Grandpa, they're about forgiveness, love, and rediscovering what truly matters. I stood there, breathing in the night air, and whispered to him, this year, no one got whiskey. But one man was honored as he deserved, without a single dollar spent.